So, hello, I'm Laura Gottlieb, and welcome to this talk. I will present my paper on relational sensitivity and participatory practice, exploring poise and punctuation through an empirical study. And before I do that, I would like to briefly introduce myself and to give an acknowledgement. Yes, I'm talking to you from Lake Mälaren in Sweden, and I grew up in Stockholm by this lake. And my parents are from Poland, so my ancestry is in the Tatra Mountains and the Highlander culture in Eastern Europe and in Jewish heritage. So this history of and present history of migration, as well as having this multicultural upbringing, adds to the topic that I talk about, which is relational sensitivity and the kinds of sensitivities that come with having different cultures to relate to and notice their differences, and also how I'm perceived in different cultures and depending on how I present myself. And yes, also getting this insight into what a privilege it is to have been brought up in this part of the world and be able to travel, and how I'm perceived into that in relation to that. So that's just a quick introduction to myself that feels significant for this work. And I would also like to pay my acknowledgements and respect to the Sami people in the northern part of this hemisphere, and on lands also parts of Sweden. And I would also like to welcome everyone here. And serdecznie zapraszam do tej prezentacji. So let's move on to my paper, where I will give a brief insight into what this was about. So I am doing a PhD here in Sweden, and I am grappling with this term relational sensitivity, which is not really a term used so much or explained by others, but I'm exploring if it's a useful word to use, and what could it entail. So this is some of my questions of what does it entail in participatory practices and design, where you're collaborating with all different kinds of actors in intimate ways, and why is relational sensitivity important, having an assumption that it is, and also wondering how we can nurture relational sensitivity through our practices. And my starting point is the work of Yoko Kalman and Light, that describe these terms and create these terms, poise and punctuation, to talk about how, as practitioners, you have a certain background and certain commitments and interests that are quite crucial to what this process and what you bring to a process. And it's for responsible design practices, it's important to reflect on yourself, and that helps you to develop your practice. And punctuation relates more to these relational dynamics and attuning to those that are also, let's say, central to what unfolds when you work with others. So this is my starting point for trying to develop or think about this wider term of relational sensitivity and different things it might mean. So I was thinking of these terms in relation to a project that I was and am involved in. It's a project where we're co-creating a container village at a campus in Sweden. And at the start of this process, I wanted to explore the planning, the initial team that's involved in this process, that is involved in inviting others into the process, but they are setting a kind of already agenda and by planning it. And so I was exploring this initial process where we're writing a funding application, and we're also planning how to structure the process, at least initially, what we want funds for, and invited the team into a joint journaling and joint analysis process. So we were journaling after these meetings to reflect on poise and punctuation, although I use different terms for it, which I'll come to the next slide. And then we collectively analyze what was significant for this process and themes related to that. And although I tried to use the terms poise and punctuation, these were quite difficult to remember and to grasp by people in this team or people that I introduce it to. It requires some engagement with it and remembering it. So instead, I've been using this model in my collaborations that highlights I, we, and it. That the subjective, intersubjective, and objective are always present. And we need to bring awareness and attention to these because they're part of forming each other. So this was involved in our journaling to reflect on these aspects and how they're interrelating. And in our joint analysis also, we use this as a process to reflect on these dimensions. So what we found was that, like other literature describes, it is an embodied process to become aware of our thoughts and emotions and sensations. And that's very much what these journal notes were talking about, how and where in our bodies we're feeling. And what was, I think, quite unique to this collaborative process, we as a group had worked with each other before and have different backgrounds and facilitation and communication practices, which enabled a safety for us to make these internal impressions external. So when we experienced tensions, we brought these into the room, which contributed to a collective awareness of these differences and these internal experiences. And this is an aspect I haven't seen in other literature that talks about relational sensitivity. And so what it also shows is when we that these subjective, intersubjective, objective aspects of the I, we, and it, they change each other, and what we do, our different tension or impressions come into what we do, and that's just something that paper shows. And in terms of what relational sensitivity does for participatory practice, why is it important that at least what we felt was valuable was feeling an intimacy and comprehension of different perspectives and values, that we, by framing them as polarities, we could also kind of understand ourselves a bit better and what's in the room. But this does not mean that it became a necessarily inclusive process. There were still aspects of inclusion. So it's important that relational sensitivity is not sort of this seen as an ideal, as in just because you bring awareness to it, it becomes perfect. It's still messy. But at least we can have a critical perspective on what's happening here and what are we continuing inviting people into. And these shared contexts for communication were useful for that, polarities for a relational sensitivity. And this model, as I've described, it worked better than using terms poise and punctuation. And this is all I have time for. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to this talk, and look forward to talking more and seeing each other in the conference. Thank you.